How often do we actually look in the mirror, genuinely look in the mirror and say, you matter. You matter too. You matter to me.
Welcome to Your Second Act, the podcast that proves that life doesn't have to end at 40, 50, or even 60, because when it comes to living your best life, age is just a number. Welcome, gorgeous. How are you today? I hope you're feeling on top of the world, but if you're not, well, listening to today's episode might be exactly what you need, because sometimes, I don't know about you, but for me, hearing someone else's story is a reminder of just how lucky, we are, and that there is always hope for a better day. And today's guest, Sophie, went through a life-threatening surgery that just over a year ago was the kind of experience that forces you to reassess everything you thought was important. And when I came across her raw and honest story on LinkedIn, it just stopped me mid-scroll, and it made me think about how often that we wait for something huge or traumatic to happen before we actually make changes, when really we should be constantly checking in, evolving and pivoting so we can make the most of the time that we have. And honestly, I really think that midlife is the perfect moment to have that rethink. And Sophie's story will make you pause and reflect, and maybe even make you make some changes of your own. So let's just get into this really special episode, because I absolutely loved my conversation with her. Sophie, just over a year ago, you were recovering from a life-saving surgery. And honestly, that kind of thing just flips your whole world upside down. And it makes you stop, reassess, and really look at what actually matters in your life. And when I read your LinkedIn post, it really stopped me in my tracks. It made me think about how we only just get one shot in life, and how important it is to live in a way that feels really aligned to your own values, instead of just going along with what we've always done and what others expect of us. So what I want to do is I actually want to start our little conversation off with the list that you wrote in this Instagram post, because like I said, it really, really grabbed me. So you've said, I actively seek opportunities to light me up. I never say yes when I want to say no. I use my voice even if it's scary or hard. I invest in relationships that truly matter. I ask for what I need in everything. I face my emotions without shame. I seek more people to be kind to. I trust my intuition always. Now, I mean, this list should be stuck on everyone's fridge, because I basically think it's a masterclass in how to live your best life in midlife. So I want to start by asking you, when did you realize that things had to change?
Well, it wasn't, firstly, thank you for having me on, because I love meeting beautiful humans. And I feel like when we first connected, I really felt a heart opening connection with you. And you have a really beautiful, gentle energy. And I think, saying yes to being on your wonderful podcast was absolutely an intentional choice, because I don't say yes to everything, as you know. And so I really felt like I wanted to spend some more time with you and getting to know you as well. So thank you, firstly.
Oh, thank you, Sophie. That's so nice.
But for me, I think hitting 40. So I'm 45 now, turning 46 in a month. And I think that when I turned 40, or when I was about to turn 40, I was really nervous about it. There was this fear around, oh my goodness, I'm going to be middle-aged when I hit 40, and was really, I suppose, a little bit daunted by the fact of no longer being a young, what society says a young woman is. And then I turned 40 and I went, why was I so scared? This is literally the most amazing time of my life, because it's not all about what society expects or what society wants. It's actually about what I want and what I need. And I actually care a little bit less about what other people think of me. And that gave me the freedom to use my voice more, to practice using it, firstly, I think more, and say no to things that didn't feel right in my gut or in me and that I really wanted to do. And I also had some friendship, a really strong friendship group where we all became estranged. And that was because we were growing in different ways and in different places. And sometimes people aren't with you forever. And so I think it became this really pivotal moment where I got to, and I say I got to because it was a choice. I got to decide, who do I want to be going forward, and who do I want to impact, and how do I want to impact the world around me. And that's where I actively decided that I wanted to do more, be more, have more, and be more aligned with who I am. And it was a journey of finding out who that person was as well, post having my kids in my 30s. So, yeah, that probably the big turning point for me. And then it's evolved with, obviously, as life challenges come at you and throw different things at you, and it tests us to find out whether what we say we want is actually what we want, and whether we can do those things that we say we want to do. And so the 40s have been exceptional for me, even with all the challenges. So, yeah.
It's interesting you say the 40s have been exceptional. So I'm 55, and I was only saying something to a friend of mine the other day that I absolutely loved my 40s. I felt way more myself. I think because I was at a stage in life where my kids were older, and I don't know, I just felt like I had kind of had my shit together.
Yep.
But I must say, I'm in my 50s now, and they are just even better.
Right.
So you got so much more to look forward to. But I mean, for you, Sophie, and I guess, I think it's great that you had this awakening at 40. But, when you were confronted by this dreadful health scare, take me through how being empowered, how realizing what it is that is important to you, how did that help you when you went through that life-changing moment, when you had that surgery that saved your life?
It was everything. If I hadn't have known my own body and listened to my own intuition around firstly getting something checked that didn't feel right in my body, then I probably would be really not in a great way, if I'm honest. So I'm more than happy to talk to you about what it was. Head and neck cancer, and so I had a small, the tiniest lump come up on my tongue and the side of my tongue, and we were traveling and in the caravan and for 3.5 months, and it was annoying me. That's all. It wasn't painful. It wasn't raw. It wasn't red. It was just this teeny tiny lump, like an ulcer, that just wouldn't go away, and it was getting slightly bigger, and it grew quite quickly. And so I think the first part of answering your question is, if I hadn't listened to myself and my inner knowing and trusted that, then I wouldn't have probably followed up as quickly as I did. That came into play again when I saw the first surgeon, who I ended up not going with for surgery because I didn't feel like he was the right fit for me. And I know that sounds probably a bit strange, but I didn't feel like he understood what I needed. And I felt like I was just another surgery, not a human at the end of surgery. And that was another trust point, and it was quite a big decision too, to actually I don't feel comfortable with you. I'm finding another surgeon, and to find one who in the end was unbelievable. He's unbelievable. He's amazing. Exactly the right person I was meant to have. The second part of it is, if I didn't have the strength to be kind to myself in the form of boundaries, then and gentleness around taking care of myself through what was quite traumatizing surgery. So I had the side of my tongue removed on the right side, and I also had, so I've got a scar along here now. It's really good. He did an amazing job. But I was cut from sort of just below my ear right down to the front of my throat, and I had 30 lymph nodes and a salivary gland taken out. So really big surgery, really confronting, to sort of be planning for that to happen. But through that, I had to really slow down and say no to certain things. And one of those things was, my husband was actually hospitalized the day after my surgery, so he had a mental health crisis occur. So he's a police officer. We've had a very big journey over the last couple of years. So as I was in recovery, the next day I got a phone call from him, and he said, I'm in hospital and I've self-presented and I'm not well. I wanted to get you to surgery. The kids are with your mum and they're safe. I'll be safe, but I'm going to be hospitalized. So he was in hospital for that whole week that I was in hospital. So both of us hospital things in that 1 week. And, you know, I talk about it like I'm not disassociated from it, because I still feel it deeply, but there's a piece in there around knowing that I had to put myself first in that very moment. And I think if that had happened maybe even a few years prior, I may not have really put myself first. And so I suppose answering the question really is trusting my inner knowing, trusting my intuition firstly, and right through the whole process of healing, because a lot of other stuff happened, and then saying no to anything that didn't help me.
Yep.
And that was the power in it, that boundary, and reinforcing boundaries around who I needed to see, when I needed to see them, what I needed to do for my recovery was really important.
You talk a lot about inner knowing, intuition, and I'm all for that. And I think that definitely comes with wisdom, with age, and experience. But sometimes I battle the intuition, and I wonder, is it my mind playing games with me? Is it real? And the fact that I really believe and the fact you felt something in your mouth and you thought, this isn't right. How many of us would ignore it and think, yeah, it's an ulcer, it'll be fine. But what I love of what you said was, when you went to see the surgeon, you knew he wasn't right for you.
Yeah.
How many of us, through fear, just trust everybody else except yourself? Now, who knows, if you had gone down that road with that surgeon, I wonder if you'd be here talking to me today, if you'd be the same person. It's really, I find intuition such a powerful thing. And yeah, like, what are your thoughts on that? Because I'm sure you probably gone through the, is it me telling myself this, or is it my real inner knowing?
Yeah.
I find this really fascinating.
Yeah. It is. It's a learning, absolutely, and it's a practice, and it's something I've worked really, really hard on over probably the last 5 to 6 years. I think when you become more of who you are and more of who you're meant to become, saying yes to the intuitive nudges becomes less scary, because you've already tested it in the past, potentially with other things that are not quite so serious. So absolutely, I'm not saying don't trust your surgeon or don't trust a medical expert, because that's something that is super important. And obviously you can make snap decisions on things and go, everything will be okay. But when it comes to something as serious as your health and potentially life-threatening, so it was what was on my tongue was a skin cancer, so fast-growing skin cancer, SCC. So if I hadn't had it removed, and then there was also another one next to it underneath the skin, which I didn't know about. If I hadn't had them removed when they were removed, then it would be much more dire. But stepping into that inner knowing, there is a beautiful grounded feeling in, it's not just you making the decision like that. It's, I've sat with it, I've felt it. Where do I feel it? Why am I feeling like that? And using the connection between the head, the heart, and the gut. And so for me, it's not about discounting what my mind is saying. So my mind was obviously saying, well, he's a surgeon. He wouldn't be an oral surgeon if he wasn't good at what he was doing. He wouldn't have done all those years of study if he wasn't good at what he was doing. But every time I sat with him, and it was probably 3 or 4 times, I felt this really, getting the full body goosebumps at the time, talking about this at the moment as well. I got the feeling in my gut and my heart that something wasn't aligned, that something was off. And it wasn't that he was not a great surgeon. I'm sure he is a great surgeon. He just wasn't the right surgeon for me. And so if people are wanting to connect more with that inner knowing or that intuition, the best way that I can describe how I make decisions is I can feel something, I can then think something. How does it feel on the heart? Does it feel resonant here? Does it feel resonant here? And then trying to balance out, am I just being silly? Or is there actually some depth to what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling? So then I will often research something. If it's really important, then I'll go and do a bit of research on the situation. So I then looked at his history, and he had only been a surgeon for a few years. So he was very fresh out of, his surgery learnings. And I don't know, I think when we meet people, we get a gut feel for whether they're our people or not. And that doesn't mean they're not the right people for other people. It just means potentially that situation or that person is not the right fit for what we need at that time. And so trusting the feeling that will often, in my gut, will feel quite grounded and quite secure and quite resonant across my whole body if something feels right. So if I meet someone and I go, oh my gosh, I love you, you're amazing, it's because there's something in your energy and something in my energy that connects on a beautiful level. It doesn't mean that you can make that decision every time, but it's about practicing, stepping into. So even this morning, I even do it with really ridiculous things like, what kind of tea do I want today? I'll have this tea. I won't have this tea. Or what candle aroma do I want on? Because I've got I always put a beautiful candle on when I've got podcast recordings and work to do, because I trust that my body will respond now, because I'm so practiced in it, to giving me exactly what I need in that moment, and will give me the wisdom to make the right decisions for me in that moment. So start small, see where you feel it, do research, something really important. Don't be afraid to say yes to what your body's responding to.
Yeah, that's so true. And just going back to what you said earlier, when you found yourself recovering from your surgery and then your husband saying, I need to look after myself. But you then realized, well, I need to look after me. And I think as women, as carers, we find that really, really hard, don't we?
So hard.
And as we get older, I think there's something freeing in saying, I'm just going to start looking after me, because that's where I think the magic starts to happen. It's great to be the empath, the carer. It's fabulous, and I wouldn't have it any other way, because I love the people that I love and I want to be there for them. But I think when I got to the point where I started to maybe start listening to my own intuition and thinking, well, what lights me up now? What is important to me? Yeah, I think that is so freeing. So how did you manage that? Because you were doing that in a really, really tough situation. You're in hospital and thinking, okay, I need to concentrate on me. I know the kids are looked after, and then my husband's going through this. That's still a really hard situation to deal with.
Yeah. Look, some days I did well, other days I didn't do well. And I think that giving ourselves the grace to not have it right all the time is a really good place to start. And that's where the self-kindness comes in around, this might feel really hard and I might feel really sad about some of the decisions that have to be made by choosing me first, and allowing those feelings to be validated, because choosing ourselves is not easy. And I talk, as you know, I talk all the time around choosing you is not selfish, and putting yourself first is the best thing to do. But it's not an easy process, and it takes practice, and it takes repetition, and it takes commitment, and it takes time to be okay with feeling uncomfortable with choosing you first.
Yeah.
And so when, obviously my situation was, and so many people go through different challenges, but my situation was not your everyday situation. But certainly choosing myself wasn't easy. That wasn't an easy decision. I didn't see Mum the whole time I was in hospital because she had my boys and she didn't feel confident to drive down to the city with the kids. So I didn't see my kids for most of that week. And so, my best friend came in and a couple of other beautiful friends came in. But choosing yourself can be a bit lonely sometimes as well.
Yeah.
And it's allowing yourself to be okay with maybe feeling a bit lonely, but knowing intrinsically that what you're choosing to do will be better for you and better for all of the people around you. So it's not easy, but it's worth it.
I was going to ask you, so by choosing you, how has that changed your relationships with your family and your friends? I mean, I'm sure they didn't turn around and say, "You're so selfish, Sophie. I can't believe you're like this. You're such a bad mother now." I mean, seriously, how has it changed? Do you think people looked at you in a different light because of it?
Absolutely. I certainly got a lot more respect. And when we respect ourselves, that's reflected back usually. Or it's like anything, isn't it? When we value ourselves, then other people are hopefully likely to value you more.
Yeah.
Well, because what you are emanating and what you give out is hopefully what's reflected back at you and to you. But my kids certainly, it grew our relationship around how they can take better care of themselves. It gave them the opportunity to be more independent for that time. It was really hard on them, I'm not going to lie. It was really, really tough to have both of us unwell at the same time. But it also showed us the depth of our love for each other, and also that loving ourselves first, no matter what age we are, whether we're, my kids were 8 or 7 and 10 at the time. But why would we not choose ourselves when the benefit of choosing ourselves and being the best version of ourselves helps everybody around us? And so that was a really big lesson, not only for me through that, to practice that. And it sounds very detached from it, but it's not, because it was the ultimate test for me on all the work that I do and all the things that I put out into the world and all the things I, hope that my children are learning. And for my husband, it allowed him to put himself first as well for a while. And being a police officer for 20 odd years, being a very caring human, he doesn't often put himself first either.
Mm.
And so we're both very generous with ourselves, with other people. And so it really gave us the opportunity to not only show ourselves that we matter and that we need this, but that our kids got to see us navigating that as well and then implementing that for them and giving them hopefully that life skill at a younger age.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I think what's crazy about humanity is it takes these challenges in life to make us really stop and, yeah, look at our lives and assess it. It's like, why can't we just be born that way?
Yeah.
To just, wouldn't it be great? And that's why I think a lot of women in midlife get to this point and they're worn out, they're burnt out, and they find themselves without purpose. They've been the caretaker. So, like, if you could sit down with a midlife woman, what advice would you give to her, to someone who's feeling stuck or overwhelmed or scared? What would you say to her?
Firstly, take a breath and really look at yourself in the mirror. Like, really look at yourself. I think, some of the women that I work with have spent their lives caring, rushing around, looking after their kids, looking after aging parents, looking after their partner, looking after friends. How often do we actually look in the mirror, genuinely look in the mirror and say, you matter. You matter too. You matter to me. And so that would be my first thing, because when I was in the frantic throes of getting everything done and trying to achieve, and, we're all chasing the next big thing. What is it, the next thing I can get done or I can achieve or say or tick off my list or say that I've, created? When do we pause? When do we pause with intention and meaning and presence? And so that would be the first thing. The next thing would be find something, and I'm going to say something, not someone, find something that you used to love doing before you became a wife, a mother, a carer, a person in a career. Because we're more than what we do for others. We're more than our job title. We are living, breathing humans.
Yeah.
And so the things that light us up, the hobbies, the exercise, the beautiful food, rather than, scoffing food while you're making school lunches or you're making dinner or whatever you're doing in the house. Mind you, I'm lucky. My hubby does all the cooking, so I'm very, very lucky.
Lucky you.
I do have a lot of friends who are very jealous of that, and he loves cooking
Yes.
beautiful food, so I certainly can't take credit for that. But finding something that really makes you feel alive and good. And it doesn't have to be anything huge. So for me, being in nature, I have I've always been a person who's loved nature, but I have doubled down on connecting with nature. I started drawing again. I started painting again. I started playing music again. I started singing again. All the things that we do as children that when we grow up, I hope I never grow up, by the way, because I'm not enjoying life anymore. I watch my boys, and when they're in the moment, even at the beach on the weekend, making sandcastles and using a dodgy old coffee cup that I'd had a coffee and they wanted to make sandcastles using it. But they're truly in the moment doing something that is making them feel good. So that would be probably the two biggest things I can suggest to people is slow down and look at yourself. and then have a think about what feels good and what used to feel good, and why aren't you scheduling that in? Why aren't you taking that time?
Yeah.
You matter. We matter.
Yeah, we do. We do. And being playful, I think, we feel like, oh, we're adults and
Yeah.
it's childlike behavior, which, it isn't, because a lot comes out of being creative, right? And I think, there's a lot of people that'll say, oh, I'm not creative. We're all creative
We
beings.
we are.
And that's where the magic happens. And it can be, anything. It's just making the shift. I think it also comes back to what we place so much value.
Mm.
What's the importance? And I think we've lost what is our true value. And, I know these are real buzzwords and people go, yeah, you hear it all the time. You scroll on Instagram. But, I just think there's so much truth in it, because
Yeah.
when you push everything else aside, you have you. And what is it that you want? And if you don't give yourself the space to find it out, then you're just going to continue going the same way you always have. And I personally don't want to get to 70 or 80 and think that life's passed me by. So that's why I'm encouraging women, get out there, do change. I mean, I've just started a retail job.
Amazing.
I've never worked in retail before, and I've left the corporate world because it no longer aligned
Yeah.
with me. I
Amazing.
just didn't. I just felt it was soulless. I thought, I don't want to be in this environment. So by me doing this, and it was scary, but I feel so good. And
I,
you ask my family, and they can see how happy I feel.
I
I
love
go. I'm working with women, which I love.
it.
I've always tended to work with men,
Yeah.
and it's fun, and it's just. I've always loved fashion. It's like, who says it's too late? I'm 55 and I'm
Yeah.
working in the shop.
Life's just
Great.
life's just starting, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And you just before we hopped on, you were telling me how you put yourself first by going on a trip on
I
your own.
Yes, I did. I went to Italy.
See? And usually you'd say, and you said to me, it cost a bit of money, and usually we just would use that money for all of us to go on a holiday.
Mhm.
But you put yourself first. And it's not like you're going to keep doing that all the time, but you needed to do that. You
Mm.
needed to take that time to do something special for you because you deserve it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us feel we're not deserving of it.
So
And that is sad. It's so, so sad.
I think, and I love that reflecting. Congratulations on your new
Huh?
move. I love that. That's so
Thank you.
about following your intuition. It's about following
Mm,
what doesn't light me up anymore. And it's not about then just going, oh, well, I'm just going to trudge along and keep going. It was, right, well, what am I going to do about that then? It's not lighting me up. I don't want to do
yeah.
it. What can I do instead? And I think there's the intuition bit, and then there's the taking action bit. And so we can sit and
Mm,
not feel right about something and do nothing about it, or we can feel something and do something to change it. And I think that's where the power sits, because once we make that change, how amazing. It might be scary, it might be terrifying, but the feeling we get once we step into something new and we step outside our comfort zone and we do something that's more aligned, it's this beautiful combination of a little bit of trepidation, but also a lot of excitement. And how often, as we get older, do we let ourselves feel excited about things?
yeah.
I spend a lot of my time thinking about how can I find things for my family and I to do, and me on my own, that will create memories, that will light us up and that will excite us.
Yep.
And as an adult, that level of excitement, it's not, usually it's excitement about buying the next thing. But for us, travel is one of our really, really important things.
Mm,
So we always schedule um, weekends away. So by the time I'm on one, I'm already booking the next one or planning about where we're going to go
great.
next. Yeah. And it's about that taking action piece. Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Love that. It's so true. I think I found that over the last few years, I felt like I was living vicariously through others.
Mm.
And I think that's what really stopped me in my tracks. and thought, well, why am I doing that? Why am I not living that excitement? Why am I not having that feeling of joy? And like, I want to do those things. And
Yeah.
when you do realize that and you step into what you want to do, everything shifts. I always say, you're never going to regret it. You won't look back. You'll just
No,
only look forward because a new door will open. But if you stay stuck, the doors are not going to open.
so true.
So, yeah. So hopefully it doesn't take going through something so traumatic in life to make you realize that. It's like if you're not happy, you want to change something, you can do it. And I really love your advice. And I think really follow your intuition, listen to yourself. I think it is really essential to
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, it's funny, my youngest son, bless him, he's 9, he just turned 9 a few months ago, but he said to me, he's into maths. He said to me, Mummy, you know, if you want to live to 100, you've only got 54 more years on this planet left.
Yeah.
And I went, wow. So I said to him, so honey, that pretty much means that for me to be ambulant and with it, hopefully enough, I've probably got 30-ish years.
Yep.
So what are we going to do in that time to make sure that by the time I get to 100, because we'll live to 100, probably won't get around on a plane or anything. What are we going to do in that time? And it really gave me such a beautiful, childlike perspective, but also a really deep wisdom that time is precious. It's of the essence. We don't
Yep.
get to choose how long we're on this planet for. So why aren't we doing all the things that make us feel amazing? Like just makes me really sad when I see people going, oh, I hate my job, or I really don't like this situation, or this makes me really unhappy. And then I see them 12 months later and they're still in that. And I think, why? Like,
Yeah.
not everyone can, blow up their lives and throw everything away, but you can find the micro moments, the micro things in your day to hopefully bring more presence and more excitement. And yeah, that 54-year thing, that's really stuck with me because I thought that's very wise. It's also kind of scary.
Yeah, that is really wise. It's like when some people say, I've probably got another 20 summers. And I think,
So
oh, but it's true.
deep. So,
Just think, what? That's scary, isn't it? I think, what? I didn't look at life that
no,
way,
but
but
wow, but it is such a, it's such an opportunity. Like we can look at it as being super scary because it does. It freaks me out a little bit. But
yeah,
um, there's so much to do. There is so much to experience,
yes,
so many people to meet. There are so many things so many foods to try. There's just so much in the world that we often don't allow ourselves to do because we're so busy doing all the things we think we should do and we have to do.
yeah. So
Fun?
less of the should, more of the want to
Yeah.
do.
Oh, that feels
I
good.
think so. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And before, we finish off this episode, I do want to ask, and your husband, did he recover from his
Yes.
oh, that's good. So he's well.
Yeah, he was diagnosed with PTSD late last year and he's doing really well. So he's back at work, he's getting really good support and yeah, he's doing well. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, I'm sure you're such a powerhouse for each other in support as well. So that's so nice to hear, Sophie. Well, I love to end all my episodes with a beautiful, inspiring quote. So if you have one that you'd love to share with us, please add it to the list of many that I have.
You've probably heard this one before, but it absolutely, and I'm going to read it because I want to make sure I get it right. But, it's a Maya Angelou quote, and I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yeah, I love that quote because it's so true.
Mm.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about. It's how we make each other feel.
Yeah.
When you and I connected and you're in another state,
Yes.
connect over Zoom.
Yeah.
But there's a special connection. And I think that's what's great. When you put yourself out there, you start to attract like-minded people and people that you can learn and grow from. So that's a beautiful, beautiful quote. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Oh, well, all the best, Sophie. Keep inspiring us on socials. I think it's great. That's how, I came across you. And I love your work. All the best.
Thanks, Michelle. It's been really just a beautiful conversation and a pleasure to chat with you heart to heart, but also I know we'll stay in touch because, like attracts like, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Your Second Act. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could rate and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to me.